On Rick.
Hello, I'm Rick Love for Sonoma TV, KSVY Radio 91.3 FM, and KSVY.org. And welcome to our ongoing series of virtual town halls with Senator Bill Dodd. This one on identity theft, data privacy, and consumer protection. Senator Dodd represents all or part of 6 North Bay counties, including Napa, Sonoma, Solano, Contra Costa, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. He is a champion of data privacy legislation and co-author of the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. This is the latest in a series of virtual town halls Senator Dodd has held in partnership with KSVY during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our panelists tonight are Alastair Mactaggart, author of Prop 24, the statewide ballot measure approved by voters on November 3rd that establishes a new law, the California Privacy Rights Act. He's also founder of Californians for Consumer Privacy. Also joining us is Jennifer Urban, clinical professor of law at UC Berkeley School of Law, where she is director of policy initiatives at the Samuelson Law, Technology, and Public Policy Clinic. And also with us, Aza Raskin, co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, former Silicon Valley interface designer, and star of the Netflix docudrama streaming now, The Social Dilemma. Before I pass it over to Senator Dodd, after our panelists talk, we will open the phone lines and you'll be able to call us here and our panelist and the senator will take your questions. That phone number is going to be 707-933-9133. It'll be about 30 minutes from now. We will be taking your questions. So now I'll hand it over to Senator Bill Dodd. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Rick. And I really appreciate KSVY and their willingness to work with me and my team to put on these town halls. This is our 5th one with KSVY, and we really enjoy the opportunity to work with you and also the ability to get on such amazing speakers like I have tonight, being joined by this distinguished group, but also callers that call in with such great questions, and the dialogue that happens on these town halls has always been extraordinary. So thank you, Rick. And thanks to everybody tuning in tonight, because your presence means that you're part of the solution too. We live in a world increasingly influenced by technological innovation. It's so much a part of our everyday life, from the way we communicate with each other, educate ourselves, and earn a living, and frankly, even how we shop for groceries. In large part, it has improved human existence, but it also has created complex problems, mostly around the collection of data through the internet, privacy breaches, and the misuse of personal information. Sophisticated algorithms connected to the websites we use track our interests in our every move. That data is then used to sell us products, or, as we've seen in recent elections, feed us persuasive or misleading news. By now, I'm sure we've all had the chilling experience of opening our internet browsers only to find that advertisements for products we recently searched for, or worse, talked about, in earshot of our virtual assistants. It leaves a distinct feeling that Big Brother is watching, and he's not necessarily looking out for our best interests. It also raises the questions of equity. Our communities of color are pushed unhealthy foods, or worse, bad loan products by algorithms. Who is being singled out and why? At the same time, we've seen in study after study that social media literacy is abysmal for students and adults alike. Fake news and hate mongering proliferate on online platforms and become self-perpetuating cycles. And we've seen insidious attacks on the foundation of our democratic societies through election interference perpetrated through social media. We don't want to stifle innovation or free speech for that matter, but we must protect consumers. There's a balance to be had. I don't think we're there yet. This is an issue that needs to be combated on two fronts: what data is being allowed to be collected, and two, being what algorithms are allowed to do. I was proud to be one of the principal authors of the California Consumer Privacy Act, which set the standard nationally here in the US. It's based on three pillars: data transparency, data control, and accountability. Data transparency is the right to know what they're collecting and what's being used. Data control is the right to opt out, prevent companies from selling data, and for minors under 16, creating an opt-in process. Accountability means Attorney General enforcement for those provisions I mentioned. This is also where the provisions that were taken from my bill, SB 1121, come in. Basically, if a company fails to take reasonable security measures, which are required under existing law, and there's a data breach of unencrypted data as a result of that failure, we ensure that impacted consumers can recover. This landmark law came in the wake of the General Data Protection Regulation at the European Union, which was an inspiration. California, as progressive as we are, still needed external pressure to get it passed. And fortunately, that came in the form of a data privacy ballot initiative qualified by our guest tonight, Alastair Mactaggart, who leveraged his 2018 measure to bring parties together in the Capitol for a deal. Without that, we would not be here today. Alastair has taken consumer protection in California a step further with Proposition 24, which won overwhelmingly with voter approval on the November ballot. I'll ask him to talk about that in a minute. Government can be a clunky institution. Luckily, we're much more nimble in California than the US federal government, but we're still far from where we need to be. Governments, especially in the US, still struggle to understand technology and be proactive rather than reactive. We need forward-looking policies. The good news is the governments can be proactive when there is a vision and more than a modicum of public support. That's why it's important that we engage experts on the topic, like our second guest tonight, Cal Law School professor Jennifer Urban, who runs the Samuelson Policy Clinic and has worked in Silicon Valley. And also Aza Raskin, a co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology and star of the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. I was honored to be on another panel with Aza just this last fall. I look forward to hearing their thoughts in a moment, but it isn't easy. It's going to take considered thought and concentrated actions. Forums like this and steps that follow are so important to tackling the job at hand. With that, I'll turn it over to Alastair Mactaggart to talk about the issue in general and his newly passed proposition specifically. Alastair, welcome.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Senator. I really appreciate this opportunity. We'll get more into the specifics, I think, of Prop 24 in a second, but just to set the stage for folks who are watching. Just imagine a device in your home that can tell the mood of the occupant, that can tell whether curse words are being used or whether smoking or drinking is going on, whether teeth are being brushed, and if so, whether the water is being left to run, and if so, for how long. Imagine a world where, and that, by the way, is that device, Google has a patent on that device. Imagine a world where 5 low-resolution images of your face can determine with a 91% confidence if you're a man whether or not you're gay. And remember that there are 9 countries in the world where it's a crime punishable by death to be gay. So think about the implications of that technology. Think about the implications of geofencing. You can put a line around any building if you're an advertiser or anybody else, really, and you can track every smartphone going in across that line, which is great if you're trying to track members of a certain religion or people who went to a protest. your Fitbit, the health device you might have on your wrist, knows everything about you. And if that same information is in the hands of a doctor, it's a crime punishable by jail time for the doctor to release it. But not for many of these commercial companies, which are tracking you, which we sign on to track our runs or our workouts. Your car is a computer on wheels. It knows how much you weigh, how often you go to the fast food restaurant, how often, whether you leave work early, whether you have a drug problem. And so, these are really some of the reasons why I thought, I really wanted to get involved. The internet has got tremendous potential. It's one of the most important and one of the best inventions of humanity. And yet it needs some guardrails. And I think anybody who thinks about this state and regulation, just think about the quality of our air. But for California, cars would likely be still very dirty. But now, because we stepped in and required car manufacturers to have cleaner cars, now you can see across Los Angeles on any day. And whether it's that or the Clean Water Act or the lead paint or car safety, so often what we find is that business actually doesn't do the right thing. And I say this as a business person, they don't do the right thing until they're pushed by government, or in this case, the people. And we just had this election where we now have essentially the equivalence of the European privacy law, which was the best in the world. I actually think we now have the best privacy law in the world in California, which will roll out over the next couple of years because it takes time to implement. But importantly, I'm convinced that this election would not have been successful unless we had already had the privacy law that was in place, that went into place in 2018. And it's truly my honor to be here with Senator Dodd, because without Senator Dodd, there would not be the existing privacy law in California, which then allowed for this next initiative to go forward. And, Senator Dodd, when I first met him, immediately grasped the importance of what we were talking about. And along with a couple other colleagues, Senator Hertzberg, some of them were Chow, but it was one of those funny things, and I'm not a politician, but it was one of those things where he could have killed it or he could have embraced it. He embraced it, and we have privacy now. So I'm super honored to be here with you, and happy and looking forward to the questions.
Great, thank you very much. Jennifer, you're up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Senator Dodd, and thanks to everyone who's listening in. We really appreciate your interest in this important topic. I was asked to bring an academic perspective, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about how we got here, where here is, and where we might go from here. When I started my career, and I was sworn into the California bar 20 years ago, last week, consumer privacy was seen by the press, to be fair, by most policymakers and others, as relatively unimportant to the public, maybe not something people cared about a lot. My guess is this was always a myth to some degree, but it was also probably true to a larger extent than it is today. And yet, 20 years ago, when I started my career, we already had a problem that had been building for decades. Those of you who are older will remember when credit card companies began calling with fraud alerts and that sort of thing. We'll remember when data brokers really started to collect a lot of information, when loyalty programs started to be put into place. And all of those things were reasons and ways of collecting our information. So for several decades, there's been an explosion of data collection. And more recently, there's been an explosion of data production by all of us, and of repurposing records that were always public but didn't used to be so available. For example, property records or voter registration records, which now, of course, are digitized and easily available and easily recombinable. All of this is in part because of a longer term set of decisions that we made in the United States that had two important components. One is what Alastair was referring to when he was talking about the Fitbit. And that's what we call the sectoral model of privacy. That in the US, we've traditionally protected privacy for certain kinds of information used by certain people. So the doctor can't use your medical data or disclose your medical data in certain ways. But when a private company who's not a medical company has the data, the rules are different. The second really important thing is called the notice and choice model. And this is the idea that we are all individual rights holders and economic actors, and we can make our own decisions about our own data. So long as we have some notice about what's going to happen, we can make a good choice in the marketplace, and that is our own choice. So around 2000, a little before, a little bit after, those two models intersected with the explosion of the web and a third model, which is the ad-based revenue model for the web. And what we ended up with was a situation that everybody's familiar with today, where the web runs on ads, which are hungry. The people who run the ads are hungry for information. The companies that sell ads are hungry for information. And we have, well, California is better now, but until recently, we've had broadly this notice and choice model that you, by using the social media site or using other websites, you've made a choice to accept this. This was always something of a myth. My colleague, Professor Chris Hufnagel, and statistician Dr. Sue Lee and I, and many others, it's not just our research, did research in the mid-2000s that showed that not only was it not true that people didn't care about privacy, people really did care about privacy, but they also completely understandably misunderstood whether and how their data were protected. So one of the things we found, for example, was that when there's a little link at the bottom of a website that says privacy policy, people thought their privacy was protected. That isn't what privacy policies do at all. I wrote them when I worked in Silicon Valley, and their job is not to protect your privacy. But it's understandable that people thought that. The second thing was that people really wanted privacy. We asked them that, they said they did. We offered them actual business propositions. For example, would you give your entire contact list to Facebook so it could offer you more friends? And people rejected those overwhelmingly, even though those are models that Facebook and other social media companies use. So why is it that people wanted more privacy but would reject them in real life? Well, it shows a flaw in the notice and choice model. There was always a bit of a myth that you have this sort of platonic choice that you can make a good decision for. And there's a lot of manipulation, which I won't talk about now because I think Aza's on that and can talk about that. But there are a lot of behavioral reasons why people make choices that make a lot of sense in the moment for a person, but are very bad for privacy. So what has changed over the last 2 years? You know, Senator Dodd and Alastair and others have really started to make progress in beginning to give us the tools to protect our privacy. Why is it? Well, one of the first things that happened, and it's very important, is that the public very obviously came to care about privacy. And I think the public probably already did, but it became more and more apparent, and reporters started to report on it, and it became something that people like Aza make documentaries about, and it was clear that it's a public policy issue. Well, one reason I'm sure is that data collection and use and technologies that collect and use lots of data are becoming more and more noticeably embedded in our lives. They permeate our lives. You probably see ads following you around. Maybe you get friend suggestions that feel a little bit creepy. There are news articles about, you know, hackers yelling at families through their Ring cameras and that sort of thing. And there's been an academic recognition as well, and Senator Dodd mentioned this too, of the differential effect of all of this on vulnerable populations, on people of certain socioeconomic classes, of different races being affected, and genders being affected differently, which clearly is a public policy concern that should be addressed. So there's a lot more awareness of what's going on. And in part, that's due to a policy legal intervention that was homegrown in California in 2003, which sounds very boring and mechanistic, which is data breach legislation. My colleague, Deirdre Mulligan at Berkeley, I suggested this actually, and the California legislature passed the first data breach law in 2003. Well, what did that do? Well, it meant that companies had to tell you if they had a breach and lost your information. That wasn't the case before. And so it became more and more obvious that data was being held by these companies, and in fact, they were losing control of it and could harm us. So that was actually, I think, really important. And Senator Dodd mentioned the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union. That's more recent, from just a few years ago, taking effect the last couple of years. That has pressed companies to have to put in place better data practices. And of course, we have the CCPA and now the CPRA here in California. So these things, along with innovations in other states like Illinois' biometrics protection law and lots of California protections, have started to change the landscape, and I think make the picture somewhat more hopeful for us being able to have some better, control over our personal data. There are some real challenges. This is a very embedded business model now. There is a lot of interest at stake. And of course, there are benefits to being able to use data to understand more about the world. And so there are legitimate reasons to try to maintain some of those benefits, but hopefully without the kinds of harms that we've seen. And I look forward to questions.
I think you're muted, Senator.
You would think by 9 months into this thing that we would have that down by now. But,
it's just technology trying to hold us down.
Yeah. Jennifer, I want to just thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And Aza, bring it up. Thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Senator Dodd, Jennifer, and Alastair. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and to listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. It can sometimes, privacy can sometimes be a very abstract feeling concept. Just want to start with an observation. A friend asked me recently, hey, why is it that we as Western societies systematically abuse farm animals? Maybe a weird place to start with this, but let's go with it. And I was thinking about it for a minute. It's like, oh, well, I don't know. Maybe it's because something about the Enlightenment and the ascendancy of reason. And it's like, oh, it's actually very simple. It's that the cultures that learned to outcompete the other cultures were the ones that learned to use animals as resources to exploit. So, which are the companies that are outcompeting all the other companies? They're the ones that are learning to use human beings as resources to exploit. And what resources are they exploiting? Well, they're exploiting sort of our click trails, all of, as Shoshana Zuboff calls it, our behavioral surplus. All of the data that we give off about ourselves, that we don't even realize how meaningful it is, are being used to create inside of their servers. It looks like zeros and ones and matrix multiplication, but what it is are these little virtual voodoo dolls of each and every one of us, where they've collected, our click trails and our toenail clippings and what websites we go to and when we go to them and what kind of messages we respond to create a little doll that starts to act more and more like us so that we can be out-simulated. And in fact, the very first sets of products, a lot of people will say that the business model of Silicon Valley, of Google and Facebook, are ads, right? Like, how much did you last pay for your Facebook account? Of course, zero. So it's the ads, but it's not actually an ad-based business model. It's the ability to change your behavior, bias, or belief. That is the business model, and to change it imperceptibly over time. The very first one of these, Google invented, and CPA, or cost per action. How much did it cost to get you to take a specific action at a specific time? And it's not just the ads. So, Facebook has gotten so good at this that their own recommendation engine recommended and got, of all of the joins to extremist groups, 64% of those joins came from Facebook's own recommendation engine using all of that data about you. using that voodoo doll. It's very effective. So privacy is abstract because you can't really point to where on your body you got hurt with privacy. It's something that happens over time. And one of the things that I think gets really illustrated well in The Social Dilemma is this image of 1 out of every 3 human beings on Earth now have one of these dolls that can be experimented on, really comes to life. I just wanted to list out, in the same way that Alastair did at the beginning, just some of the things that the phone can tell about you already. Because consent in the opt-in model is very hard when you don't understand how different data streams about you can be assembled to create a very rich model. It makes it hard to say, yes, you actually consent. So a lot of this comes from Carissa Valise's work at the University of Oxford and the author of Privacy is Power. But here's what your phone can tell about you right now. It includes who your friends and family are, where you live, with whom you sleep, if you're having an affair, where you work, your credit history, your purchasing power, your diseases, your personality traits, your sexual fantasies and orientation, your political tendencies, whether you've had an abortion, whether you do drugs, which drugs you do, how well you drive, whether you're depressed, when you're beginning a relationship, if you lost your job, the specific type of messaging that is persuasive to you, when you are most susceptible to persuasion, your age, what you search for, what you buy, what videos you watch, what keeps you up at night, and your guilty pleasures. Oh, and how well you sleep. And where is this going? So there's a technology in AI called style transfer. It's used in images. It's used for when you take one picture, say like a painting by Chagall, and the AI with just one picture learns that style and then can apply it to another image, like a picture of your face, and all of a sudden your face is painted as if Chagall had painted it. And that's great. But this technology is just coming online for text, style transfer for text. And what does this mean? This means somebody like Google or Facebook or Instagram can take all of your posts and learn how to write in your style. It's a little creepy, but what's creepier is that Google could say, read every single one of your emails, know which emails you respond to quickly or positively, and learn the style which you are uniquely persuaded by. Now, they can sell the ability to access that model such that any marketer can come in with their message and have it be rewritten in a style uniquely persuasive to you, the one that uses the words and the catchphrases and the topics that you particularly like. And what's interesting about this case is that where was privacy broken here? It's not like Google ever gave your data to somebody else. They didn't even give the model, but they're giving away the ability to persuade you because of a kind of asymmetric knowledge that lets them exploit your behavior for profit. And that, I think, is where the puck is going and where we need to start thinking about. I am so thankful to Alastair and Dodd for the work they're doing and have done for protecting privacy as it stands now. And in a world of AI and derived data streams, we need to start thinking about fundamental new types of human rights, about what can be collected about us, and more importantly, what can be predicted about us so that our agency isn't taken from us.
Wow, Aza, thank you very much. Really appreciate that perspective. And Rick, now, can we move into some questions and answers? Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. And now we're going to open up. The phone line is 707-933-9133. Again, 707-933-9133. We are at our virtual town hall on identity theft, data privacy, and consumer protection. And while people are dialing in on 707-933-9133, Senator Dodd, I thought I would have a question for you. How did you first become interested in this issue? Did you have a personal experience? Did a relative mail money to a Nigerian prince? What is it that brought you to put so much time into the California Consumer Privacy Act?
You know, when I first got to the legislature in January of 2015, this really wasn't even on my radar. I did have my identity stolen which was, let me just tell you, it was probably one of the most awful experiences I've had in my life. And that was not going well. It took, I mean, I had intervention from the county of Napa, the state of California, and I just felt like, wow, if a California legislator has this much problem trying to get out from underneath this, this ID theft situation, then what does the average person in the state of California have to go through? And it just blew me away. So I passed the first, it was ID Theft Resolution Act that really put, bigger and stronger standards in place to help people when their, when their identity is stolen. Then fast forward, that we've heard a lot about the bill to prevent data breaches. That was my portion, along with Ed Chow's portion and Senator Bob Hertzberg's portion of this Data Privacy Act. And, it just was unbelievable to me that how many companies were out there that weren't doing the bare minimum that they needed to do to protect all our ID. And it was really a straightforward bill. But let me tell you, even straightforward bills in Sacramento, when you have big business coming in and trying to sell your colleagues that this is going to be the end of technology as we know it. They're stifling technology, and this is really bad for all of us. And essentially, my bill only did, look at, you've got to do the basic minimums and probably a little bit more in order to protect people, the customers that you serve, to protect their identity. And so that's really how I got involved in it. And I really, frankly, was having a difficult time until Alastair came in. And as I said before, Alastair was that momentum, that push from the outside that Sacramento really needed at the time. He came in with a privacy initiative that would probably business would look at it and say that would have been tougher on them. So it gave room for compromise. And often that's what really gets things going in Sacramento. So I'm very appreciative of Alastair and his involvement, and it became just a priority for me and an inspiration, and we're here today talking about it.
It's interesting in hearing you speak about it. It's almost almost like a repeat of the Industrial Revolution, where we had to set up these guardrails to protect consumers and to protect workers. And we're in another revolution right now and facing the same sort of thing. We've got a caller now, John from Vallejo, with a question about scanning faces to determine sexuality, something Alastair mentioned at the top. John?
Yes. The question, start with, I've heard that people say that computers can determine personal traits of the users, including sexual orientation, just by scanning their eyes. Is that really true? And what else can computers determine about the users? And that's the question.
Who wants to jump in with John's call? Thank you, John.
Go ahead.
John, if you look up a Stanford professor, his name is Michal Kosinski, Kosinski, and he's got a couple of studies that'll really amaze you. One is this study showing that it's 5 low-resolution images of just your face, not your eyes, but it's your face. But going back to something that Aza was saying, here's the crazy part about it. What they do is they basically take tens of thousands of photos from gay dating sites and then from straight dating sites, and that's how they train the algorithm. The crazy part is they don't actually know why it works. This is where the AI starts to get into it. It's smart. It can find out the relationship. Who knows? It's something about people's expression. Is it something about the architecture of their face? They don't know, but what they know is it works. So they know that they can put the face into the engine and 91% of the time it gets the right answer. They don't know why. And this is, going back to Aza's, idea of the little, the puppet that we have. The computer doesn't, you, the programmer, don't have to know why it works. You just have to know it works. And that's where this stuff is. Your computers are getting more powerful. We're producing, as Jennifer said, more and more data about ourselves. He's also got, the same guy, Professor Kaczynski's also got another study showing that with access to 300, only 300 of your likes on Facebook, it can predict your answers to a well-known personality test that's been around for 50 years, better than your spouse. Now, that's just with 300 of your likes. But what most people don't understand is that Facebook and Google and Twitter and all these various firms are watching you at all times, whether you're a customer or not, whether you're a user or not, whether you're logged in or not. They're keeping track of what you do across the internet. And it's not even a river, it's a tidal wave of information, trillions of pieces of information a day going into these very few firms that are able to make sense of it, that have the computing resources necessary to make sense of it. And that's where you go back to this notion that they kind of know us better than ourselves because we forget, but they never forget.
Wow.
Thank you for the call, John, and Alastair for the response. Another caller now, Vince from Thousand Oaks, with a question on laws regarding spreading conspiracies on social media, something that's been very prevalent during our election year.
Yeah, as we all know, social media has had a profound effect on perpetuating conspiracies and false information for political purposes. And considering that more than 40% of the United States believe the presidential election was rigged and stolen, social media has played a major role in affecting our very democracy. What kind of laws could be passed that would prevent artificial intelligence algorithms from being used as propaganda machines to manipulate the public?
Aza, you want to try that one?
Sure. So there could be some very simple ones, like, one of our friends and disinformation researcher at Stanford, Renee DiResta, likes to say, if you can make something trend, you make it true. We could very simply just remove trending and recommendation systems. It wouldn't be great for the bottom lines of YouTube and Facebook, but it would remove one of the largest surface areas of threat right now. We could also change the laws so that companies are responsible or liable for the information that they promote or amplify, right? So right now there's part of the CDA Act, Rule 230, which says that if you are an online sort of ISP, if you're a service provider, you are not responsible for content that users generate or put online. And that's what's let the internet flourish. It's sort of like the internet was deregulated, and then as the internet ate the world, everything that it ate got deregulated. There used to be controls for, what kinds of ads and cartoons could be shown to kids on Saturday morning. But as YouTube ate Saturday morning cartoons, it also ate the regulations and protections that went along with it. So we can take a lot of the protections that we used to have for our physical infrastructure and just apply them back to our digital infrastructure.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Another caller on the phone now. That phone number again is 707-933-9133 if you want to call in and talk to Senator Dodd or our panelists, Alastair Mactaggart, Jennifer Urban, and Aza Raskin, joining our virtual town hall on identity theft, data privacy, and consumer protection. Our next caller is Susan from Davis, and she has a question on data privacy for vaccines. Very, very important issue going to be facing us in the next months.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to know whether the state of California is going to cooperate with the Trump administration to turn over all the personal information of every patient that gets the COVID-19 vaccine. Because they made a big announcement today when they start distributing the vaccine, they're requiring every state to provide the names and addresses and ages and other personal information about every patient that gets the vaccine. And if the states don't agree, they won't distribute the vaccine. So what's California going to do about that?
Well, let me just start, and then I don't know, Jennifer, we can turn to you. I find it very hard to believe that that type of policy, is going to fly, particularly in the time frame that this president has left. I think it's, we still have our privacy laws, HIPAA, and in the United States. Certainly, the people that are working right now on California's plan will have all the information, will know who is vaccinated, but widespread dissemination of that information really does not seem appropriate to me. Maybe I'm not getting it. Jennifer, you want to opine?
Well, this announcement was today, as the caller said, and I took a quick look at the data sharing agreement that the administration is asking states to sign. I confess I didn't have time to fully parse it. But what I think the caller is reacting to is, and she should correct me if I'm wrong, is the level of detail of the information. It involves definitely identifying information about patients. And the first question one always has to ask about data collection in a situation like this is, what's the purpose to which it's going to be put, and is this data actually necessary to the purpose? And after you've answered that question, then you need to talk about how you would limit the use to the purpose and whether the data will be deleted after a certain period of time, and will it not be shared with other agencies and all of these things. But one of the things that raises so many questions about this particular policy is that, and I'm not an immunologist or an expert in the kind of data you need for this, but it seems to go beyond what is necessary to understand whether the vaccine is being disseminated, to be able to generally track the vaccine in case people have side effects and that sort of thing. I will say that the data agreement does allow for states to use privacy protecting mechanisms so that they're only sharing non-identifiable information. And that seems like something that would be a really important safeguard here. Also, of course, this is, the definition of an important public interest, to be able to know whether the population is developing sufficient immunity for the pandemic to die down, and to be able to understand whether there are any side effects from the vaccine and whether it works. But there are ways to do that without necessarily collecting a bunch of identifying information. And in my sort of brief time being able to look at it, my understanding was this is probably more granular than is necessary.
Next up, we have a call from Ashley from Napa, a question on the balance between innovation and protecting consumers. Ashley?
Hi there. So my question is, how do we find a middle ground that allows for innovation in products that help consumers but avoid problems and abuses?
I think generally...
Go ahead, Aza. Go ahead.
I think generally speaking, where policy can do its best work is by creating the conditions in which products can emerge. So that is, you don't generally want to have regulations that say, implement this way, do this, you can't have this. Instead, you sort of want to, it's like growing a garden. You want to create a beautiful garden. You don't control any particular plant. You just create the conditions in which the beautiful garden will grow. And I think regulation is like that. You want to set out principles, constraints, and within that, then incredible designs can happen. I'm thinking about how, when Microsoft was sort of got hit with antitrust, what emerged after it was in fact much more innovation than was there before. And that's sort of, it's creating the space for innovation to happen. Right now, these companies like Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram have a kind of monopoly that's a network effect, a sort of a Metcalfe monopoly, if you will. That is, it's very hard for new entrants to get up to speed or emerge into a market because Facebook already has all of your friends, and so it's hard to build your own network. So by creating space in which new kinds of companies can grow, I think we actually see an increase in innovation.
And Senator Rick, I'll just say one thing about the approach the CCPA and CPRA take, which is really, I think, interesting. In this law, we require businesses not just to deal with you, because if all of us are required to do a lot of stuff every time we get to a website, we're doomed, because the businesses will make it difficult for you to exercise your rights. But both CCPA and now CPRA enshrine into law this notion that you should be able to have another person act for you. And think of that as your global phone, your phone setting or your browser setting, or frankly, an app that you install and kind of hire, so to speak, to manage your privacy for you. I'm convinced that what we've actually just done in California is start a privacy industry. If you think back to viruses, no one knew there were computer viruses, then there were computer viruses, and then there's a computer antivirus industry. The same thing is going to happen here with privacy. And I think it's going to become a fabulous strength of the California experience, economy, and I think so. Just stay tuned and wait for innovation. And the garden, we've created the conditions for the garden, and the flowers will grow.
Pruning tech, I like that. Another caller now, and thanks very much for all our callers. You can call in at 707-933-9133 if you have a question for our panel with Senator Bill Dodd, Jennifer Urban, Aza Raskin, and Alastair Mactaggart on our virtual town hall about identity theft, data privacy, and consumer protection here on Sonoma TV. We have Brad in Palo Alto with a question on the regulation of machine learning that allows advances without abuses of consumers, citing the facial recognition example brought up earlier. Brad?
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking of machine learning as kind of an example, but I guess it's more of a policy question. So I'm wondering, what do you guys see as kind of the fix to squaring method versus intent? So when you have the same method, so take facial recognition, for example, and it can have negative impacts that were mentioned earlier in the talk about violating someone's privacy when it comes to sexual preference or something like that. But it also might have positive preferences as far as, we use machine learning and facial recognition for security on phones, for predicting disease, things like that. When it's the same process of facial recognition, but the negative depends on how it's being used and the outcome, where's the policy fix to that? Do you guys see?
Jennifer?
Sure. I think, it's a little bit of a tough problem because once you begin using the technology for one thing, our experience tells us that we tend to get mission creep, so that it is used for other things. But since we're talking about facial recognition technology and we know that it's here, we know that people use it to unlock their phones, we know that there are lots of different potential uses for it. I think there are a few things that are important to consider. One is something that you alluded to, which is the nature of the use and the user. And we can certainly circumscribe the kinds of uses that these sorts of technologies are going to be put to. We know how to do this more generally about information. We have a warrant requirement for certain kinds of information. We have a super warrant requirement for wiretaps if the government is going to be wiretapping somebody's phone. So we certainly can come up with ways to circumscribe the uses of information. We would want to reconsider those as things develop, but I think it's also really important that we don't leave aside the questions that we should be asking as the technology develops about how good it really is for what people are trying to use it for and whether it's having differential effects on different people. So we talked about being able to tell if a man is gay by looking at a blurry or low resolution image of his face. But at the same time, we also know from research by Dr. Timnit Gebru and others that AI facial recognition actually is differentially good at different people. So it can recognize white men much better than it can recognize women, and particularly women of color and people of color generally. And if we're not asking those questions about the tools that are developing as we are thinking about how they should be used, then we are not going to be making the right decision. So I think it's important to be sure that we're always going back to those first principles and trying to understand how the technology works underneath as well.
Excellent. And an email question that...
Rick, my name is on that one, just to answer Brad, a couple things about new Prop 24. So Prop 24 will allow you to stop the use of your biometric information when it's being used to identify you. And part of that is your facial recognition. So this is a sea change that just happened here in California. And also it'll allow you to opt out of the algorithm when these companies create these profiles about you. Are you only seeing certain jobs because of your race or your gender or your education level? And how would you even know? So now we import this, we create this concept of profiles, and we say, if you're profiling me, you got to tell me, you got to let me object to it, and you have to tell me about the algorithm that was used to create that profile. And that's the only way we're going to stop this, is we're going to start to dry up the use of this technology in these ways that can be very discriminatory, and also have the disinfectant of sunshine around this.
An email question now from HE. He's asking, when will the phone companies be forced to make blocking robocalls free? He says on his landline right now with AT&T, they won't block his calls unless he pays them to do it, and he's feeling extorted. Any input on when that might be on the horizon?
I think that's probably a federal preemption issue for state law. Jennifer might want to comment on that, but I'll tell you, I'm right with them. I am so sick and tired, and now they've got my mobile phone, so it's something that's a real issue for so many people.
Yes, that is the Federal Communications Commission's job, and the FCC, I know for a long time, has been aware of the extreme frustration that people feel with robocalls, which is why we have the Do Not Call registry and other things. The problem with those laws is that the bad actors don't pay any attention to them. And so that's hugely frustrating. And I absolutely agree that the FCC should be trying to update that. You can use the TCPA, which is another federal law, to try to get some recompense, if you like, for those robocalls. However, of course, it requires you to take action, and that is frustrating because the cost of trying to take action compared to the annoyance of a robocall is going to seem like a lot.
Another question about enforcement now. Ian from Montara is asking, when will enforcement actions begin under the CCPA? Ian? Are you there, Ian?
Yes. When do we expect to see some actual enforcement actions? I mean, Javier Becerra is now leaving, so maybe that's going to cause issue, but do we expect to see some actual, enforcement action that will drive the companies to get in line?
Maybe I might address that. One of the things that Javier Becerra, the AG, had said was, he didn't have the resources to pursue much enforcement, perhaps only 3 or 4 cases a year. And frankly, that's one of the real improvements that Prop 24 does. So Prop 24 will allocate out of the general fund, so it's not subject to appropriations games in the legislature, $10 million a year, which you say, okay, that's not we're up against $1 trillion companies. But by the way, at the current allocation right now, they're getting 4.6 million, and they hired 23 people in the privacy unit for that. So this equates to about 50 people, which is 25% more than the 40 people that the FTC has for the entire country. So this right away will be the most effective, I think, privacy agency in the country. Add in the following: right now, under current law, only the AG can enforce. Under the new law, the attorney, the new commission will be the agency, the privacy agency will be able to enforce. The attorney general can step in and take over a case. And then much more importantly, all 58 county district attorneys and the 4 biggest city attorneys will also be able to enforce the law. And remember, there are 8 counties in California that are bigger than, I think it's 11 smallest states. LA County would be the 10th largest state in the country. So this is a massive increase in enforcement for privacy. It'll take a while. The new law doesn't start to get enforced for 2 more years, but these things take a while. But this has been nothing short of a revolution in terms of what the voters just enacted at the ballot box.
Question now from Joel from Woodland about digital assistant devices. How much do they monitor And do you personally own one? Any of our panelists? Joel?
I'm here. Thank you very much. My question was, wanted to go Christmas shopping for my family, and I want to know if I should buy my loved ones a personal assisted technology such as Alexa for Christmas with all the privacy issues, and are those triggered by just a command, or are they constantly, listening to conversation in my home?
They're constantly listening for a catchword, a phrase for which they wake up. However, they're not perfect. And so they will often pick up in the same way that Siri will sometimes wake up on your phone, even though you didn't say anything like Siri. These devices also pick that up, and they will then stream your audio. Amazon does this in particular, back to the servers, where often humans plus AI are sitting there listening in. Amazon has also been particularly bad about turning over their records to law enforcement without necessarily notifying their users. So I personally have made the choice to not have any of those devices in my house.
I also have made the same choice. I don't have any of those devices in my house. If you are attracted to them, which a lot of people are, of course, I would suggest that you think about what is it exactly that you're hoping your family members or you would get out of the device, and what is the benefit that it's going to provide commensurate with the privacy challenges that it might create. And then if you do go ahead and buy one, be sure to take as many security precautions as you can. Make sure that you change the default passwords. Make sure that you're understanding that it is listening for those catchwords. See if you can find out where the data is going, and that you've made all the settings as private as you can to your satisfaction.
I'll add only one other thing, which is that this year during the fires, I went to buy a air purifier, and it was fascinating because the smart air purifier, the one that had Wi-Fi and I could use Alexa and Google Voice, was much less expensive than the dumb one. And that should tell you everything you need to know.
Fascinating.
For what it's worth, Rick, I got one for Christmas last year, and it's still in the box.
Sarah from Napa, thank you for your patience. You've got a great question, and we're going to hold it because we want to ask it of all our panelists to wrap up the town hall. So I want to take the other internet question that we got from Danny. He's asking, in a nutshell, why isn't the default setting most private? Why are citizens and consumers not able to directly control how their data is used? And the current default is wide open. Why can't the default be, and what would it take to make the default be complete and utter privacy, and then slowly but surely move out from there at the owner or the user's discretion?
Well, we are living in a world that was created by those models that I was talking about earlier. And the model in the United States was not default privacy for commercial actors who are collecting the kind of information that commercial actors are collecting about where you're going on the web and what you're doing and what you're clicking on and that kind of thing. So we're basically living under a legacy system that is a default opt-out system, if that. And for a long time, we didn't have very many opt-out choices either. I will say that the privacy that we have today that is getting better does still tend to be opt-out for a lot of kinds of data. And moving to an opt-in system would be a larger leap that I think would need to come from demand by the public, basically.
And now
I add this because actually it's kind of important. Sorry, actually Jennifer's colleague, Chris Hoofnagel, is a professor at Berkeley Law, really helped me understand when I was doing the first drafting of CCPA, it's the difference between opt-in and opt-out. And there, without belaboring it, one of the reasons that default privacy is not set at like 10 right now is that there is a large core of jurisprudence basically centered around a 2011 case in Vermont around data brokers that went to the Supreme Court. And there's a worry that if you restrict companies too much from collecting and manipulating data, you'll tread on the company's First Amendment rights. It's kind of funny to think that companies have First Amendment rights, but in this country they do. Yes. And so I didn't write the law. I just tried to deal with the law that was given. Opt out is a regulation of commercial speech, much lower bar. But my goal has always been to say, look, if you can do something once, click it, set it and forget it, and then you don't have any more issues, you kind of get to the same place. So yes, I think it will take some requirement for you to click on your phone, don't track, don't sell my data, but then afterwards you'll be done. That's the goal. You have to do something, but other than that, really nothing.
And our final question for this evening, and I'd love to have Alastair, Jennifer, and Aza all jump in on this. The question is from Sarah in Napa about where social media will be in 10 years without any further regulations. Sarah?
Hi. If innovation continues unchecked over the next 10 years, what does that look like, and what's the biggest fear?
Alastair, you want to start?
Well, I'm actually very optimistic right now, given where California is going. This is a first step. It's not a last step. This is a debate that's going to keep on going. This technology is brand new, essentially. We're all carrying around these devices to carry our phone. It's 10 years old. In 100 years, we're still going to be debating the line between privacy and business power. But I think we're on the right track now, much as, antitrust was this tipping point, and all of a sudden with the law, now we have this ability to regulate giant companies. And yet 100 years later, we're still debating 150 years later, we're still debating where the line is. I think that, in terms of the social media companies, if you think, I talked earlier about cars, imagine trying to sell a car without an airbag or an ABS brake right now. It would be hard. The consumer would say no. And yet when that was, when safety was first really being pushed by the consumer advocates in the 1950s, the car companies resisted it immensely. My hope is that in 10 years or 20 years, the best parts of social media will be there, the connecting, but this addiction, as Aza was talking about, this trending, some of these really egregious and frankly coercive practices will have been ironed out. I think there's still plenty of money for these companies to make and not really, in many respects, contribute to so many negative aspects of the technology. So I hope that the good parts are preserved, but that we've been able to get a grip on the bad parts.
Great. Jennifer, social media in 10 years without further regulation. Sarah's question.
I'm somewhat optimistic for some of the reasons that Alastair said as well. But what I fear actually is the continued entrenchment of a few companies and what that would mean for our personal freedom, in fact. The companies that actually have the capacity to collect the data and make the leaps and the sort of approximations of us that Aza was talking about is really a handful of large companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Apples, the Microsofts, those kinds of companies. And they have become, they have a very large competitive advantage that continues to grow as they become more entrenched. And so my worry is that that would continue. And my hope is that regulation that we can develop creates a more level playing field for smaller companies that would allow them to compete, to allow that garden to grow, as Aza was discussing. It has to be done very carefully because it's very easy to create a regulation that players with a lot of resources are able to take advantage of, or even able to operate within, whereas newcomers cannot. And so we have to be really thoughtful and careful about how we develop regulation, because my hope is that we will end up with a lot more competition and a lot more options for people to be able to do all of the connecting and everything that they would like to do without some of the poor choices that they have now.
Aza Raskin, same question for you from Sarah in Napa. What will social media be in 10 years without further regulation?
I very much liked Alastair's pointing to car companies as they didn't used to have seatbelts or airbags. And Ralph Nader had this great line, which is that they were unsafe at any speed. And I think where we are now with social media is that they're unsafe on any screen, because they put us into our own personal micro realities where it's not hinged on what's true, but just what gets clicked and what activates our amygdala, what gets us angry, what gets us engaged, because hey, that's what these companies make money on, is our engagement. And they take these micro realities and then they explode them against each other, right? Like as a liberal, I go on Twitter and I can see every example of the very worst behavior of the conservative side. If I'm conservative and I go online, I can find everyone that agrees with me and the very worst examples of all the terrible things that liberals are doing to my side. And so what we get is, in an unregulated world where social media just continues to go as it is, we get an exponential amount of anger, of groups pitted against each other, of the inability to have conversation, have shared fact. We fail to rise to meet the challenges of the 21st century. We do not agree on climate change. We do not agree on social justice issues. We cannot come together to solve the biggest problems. We do not learn to cooperate, which means we'll lose out to other countries that do not have our values, but are learning how to cooperate at scale better. That is China. If social media continues unabated, it's not that technology is an existential threat. It's that the worst of society is an existential threat. And technology is feeding the worst of ourselves back to ourselves. It is bringing out the worst of society. But the hope here is that, in these sort of completely unfettered capitalism pointed at the heart of us humans, right? Like the analogy is we pointed capitalism at the earth, unfettered capitalism, and it hollowed out the earth and polluted our commons, and created the conditions for global climate change, where wildfires run rampant, where we have giant hurricanes and droughts, global warming and sea level rise. We have now pointed those same engines, unregulated, unfettered, at the human spirit, and it's hollowing us out and polluting our epistemic or our information environment. And it's creating the conditions where conspiracy theory runs like wildfire, where disinformation hits like hurricanes. And the hope here, right, is that we have never even tried to regulate the surveillance economy or the attention economy. And so even though the bad path is really bad, we should find a lot of hope in the fact that we can now start to try.
And Senator Bill Dodd, I'll give you the last word on Sarah's from Napa's question about social regulation. If we leave it unregulated, what will that look like?
Well, I think one of the things about Alastair's Proposition 24, that it was very clear in that it can't be weakened. It can only be strengthened. And so there'll be opportunities for us in Sacramento. And I look forward to getting back to Sacramento to work on some of the suggestions and ideas and thoughts that we all talked about here this evening in moving the ball forward on this very, very important topic. I would like to take this opportunity. I think I kind of glossed over my good friend, Senator Bob Hertzberg's involvement in this issue. He has been nothing short of a champion, and really somebody that moved the needle in so many ways to get the bill through the Senate and the Assembly, and also working with Alastair and others to help this cause. I'd like to congratulate Alastair one more time. for the great work he did and for stepping up to the plate for mankind, for the people in the state of California. I think it's incredibly amazing. It really makes me take my hat off to him, and also to Jennifer and Aza for your compassion and your thoughts and your skills and knowledge about this issue and bringing it to the forefront and getting people to have a better understanding of what's gone on is so incredibly important. I am so honored to be in all three of your presence here, and I really thank you very much for being panelists. Rick, once again, KSVY, great partner for yet another forum that we've had tonight. I think it's been very successful. And to callers, thank you so much for these great questions, really well thought out. And I heard that we're leaving a lot of people on the line. So I apologize. We'll try to figure out a way to get through more quicker next time, perhaps. But I'm just really thankful to our panelists and our callers and KSVY. Thank you very much, and good night.
Well, thank you, Senator. This has been our virtual town hall on identity theft, data privacy, and consumer protection with Senator Bill Dodd. Our panelists tonight, Alastair Mactaggart, author of Proposition 24, Jennifer Urban, clinical professor of law at UC Berkeley School of Law, and Aza Raskin, co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology. We'll keep you posted on future virtual town halls with Senator Dodd. Thank you again. Thanks to all our callers. My name is Rick Love for Sonoma TV, KSVY Radio, 91.3 FM, ksvy.org. And now we return to Big Fish in Progress, featuring King Daddy Murr and the Prince of Thieves on KSVY. Thank you.